Good morning, everyone. It is Wednesday, December 21st, and we will be discussing, we've already read it, The Day the Brooklyn Dodgers Finally Died. And it's by Thane Rosenbaum. And actually, you could get this story online. Let's see if
I read the wrong story.
I read the Afterlife of Skeptics.
Yeah, I did too. I did too.
I must have skipped ahead, and I sent out an email.
Yeah.
Here you're on the email, yeah. Oh, here's Alan, woohoo.
I read the Afterlife of Skeptics also because that was on the list I had.
Right, right. And let's see if that's the next one, which I have not prepared.
Well, I read the Dodgers one. Isn't the Dodgers the next
Okay.
one?
Let's do Dodgers.
I read the Dodgers one.
Dodgers.
Here's the Dodgers one. I can give you, well, first let me tell you about Thane, and that's an old picture of him. I can show you a more recent picture of him in a hot minute.
I know what happened, Vanessa. One of the sheets that you gave us has that as the
and
next,
one doesn't. Yeah.
and one doesn't.
Hi, Alan. I'm glad you got on. Well, Thane Rosenbaum is a novelist, essayist, law professor, and the author of novels, The Golems of Gotham, Secondhand Smoke, which was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Award. And he appears frequently at the 92nd Street Y, where he moderates an annual series of discussions on Jewish culture and politics. I think he does a lot about Israel. He seems to be a really interesting guy. Let me just show you a more recent picture of him. I think he also did some stuff on Israel. So that's the picture on his website, but I think, he's aged a scotch here. Anyway, so I don't know I know some people haven't read it. We could still talk about it a little bit because, and then, you could go back and I could give you a little synopsis because it's about Holocaust survivors. People who read the book, read the story, did you like it?
Oh, yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
So it starts off with a guy who goes to shul all the time, Max, who's a Yekka, a German Jew who's very medudak, he's very exact, and his Honda is, and they say a non-Bavarian car, is marked with a swastika. Alice.
Yeah, I thought they were all from Poland. All three of them were from Poland.
Poland.
Right. Yeah. Yes. But you can have Yekka tendencies even if you're not from Germany.
What word are you using? Yekka?
Yekka. A Yekka. Right. I'm going to put it in the chat. That was one of the words used. And when you call someone a Yekka, that means they're always on time. They're very exact. It comes from the Hebrew word for exact, and it's usually attributed to German Jews. Some Rabbi Levy, who was at Legacy Lakeside, he was a Yekka. If services were to start at 8, he started at 7:59. And the first year that Rabbi Sarada was there, don't tell him I'm telling you this story. My parents were there, and it's high holy days, and it's like 10 after. My mom goes, if this was Rabbi Levy, we'd be done by now. Like he was the example of a Yekka. He started always, like a minute early. So that's what they were referring to here. And again, in broad painting in broad stripes, these three Holocaust survivors, want to do something in their neighborhood in Brooklyn because they're swastikas and they try to go to the police. I thought it was super ironic that the police cop, detailed to them was from Poland. And they didn't make a lot about that, but I think that was symbolic. Oh, Ellen, I can hear you, but okay. I had to sign using my browser. Okay. I don't know why the regular link. Let's see. Can it might have to do with the settings on your computer. You're unmuted. We can see you. Okay. All right. We'll talk. All right. And feel free to chat. Lynn.
For those who haven't read the story, you need to know that when Max Birnbaum, who is the central character, when he comes out of synagogue, he sees a silver spray painted swastika on his Honda. And he sees that swastika painted on some other cars as well. And that was the trigger. That was the trigger of the short story. That was the inciting incident that started the whole thing going. And then they proliferated through Brooklyn. I mean, 26 swastikas were found, and then sayings started, we hate the Jews and all of that. So it just, the anti-Semitism just proliferated, and that was
exactly
the start.
And I'm going to go to Beverly and then Merle. I do want to say this is set in 2003, so it's not old and it's not totally current. Izzy couldn't make it today, but it certainly resonates to us today. Beverly, then Merle.
Okay, hi. So I'm new to the group. I just wanted to introduce myself. I've been very quiet because I was listening to all of you who are very articulate and very smart. So I thought, well, I'll just listen for a while. But with this story, I can't listen anymore without speaking. First of all, I thought the story was amazing, and it hit me very hard, very visceral, very upsetting, and it felt like it could have been written right now. It felt so current that it was very, very frightening. I know I have a powerful Jewish identity, but when I read this story, I said, oh my God, it was so terrifying. But with all of that, the writer puts in little sentences that are so funny. I mean, in the first paragraph, he talks about murderers who kill people and some who just want to kill people. And he said, apparently criminals receive a break for failure. That's very funny.
Yeah.
And he has a lot of lines like that throughout this horrendously painful story that, is very funny. And it's amazing in such a few pages what a punch this story has. And these survivors were like this little vigilante group. And when they posted, what was interesting is nobody currently knew what those tattoos meant on their arm. Was it a phone number? What was it? And yet they post their Auschwitz numbers to say, I'm here. So it was a very brave, upsetting, powerful story. I haven't recovered from it. I really am not sure if I will recover from it, because it makes me so sad that it's today. And what can we do as Jews to confront this wave of anti-Semitism in front of our faces and on our campuses, etc. Anyway, it's very nice to meet all of you. I like being in this group, and it was Sue Robert who brought me into the temple and into the group, and that's it.
Thank you, Beverly. And Sue's at the doctor, but we're recording for her. And we'll test her when I see her next. Merle and then Sandy.
I just wanted to talk about the swastika for a minute. I don't think most people realize that it was an ancient religious symbol that meant something good and spiritual, used by Indian cultures and Koreans. If you walk through a street in India, you might see a swastika in a store, like where vendors are just selling things on the street. It's not a bad thing, but the Nazis appropriated it in a way where they tipped it like a little to the right. So it's not the traditional swastika that you would see in these other cultures. And they appropriated it in a way that made it an evil symbol. And these vigilantes were amazing and funny in how they fought this anti-Semitism. But I don't know, do most people know that about the swastika? That it was originally,
I think so.
it was,
I think, it has certainly come to my attention, but I think that because of the overwhelming usage during the Nazi period, that it could never go back to
Right.
an Indian or an old ancient type
right,
of
but
symbol.
if-
Just as we'll never hear little babies being named Adolf.
right. If you saw it though on a Korean church or anywhere in India, it's not going to look exactly the same. It's going to be more geometrically straight up and down, whereas the Nazi symbol is tipped a little to the right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have Sandy and then Susan Benjamin. Sandy?
I thought the story was just great writing. I want to sit down one day and read it over again. The funny part is that we've had to swallow this, excuse me, this shit from Kanye West. And then you had that scene in the ghetto where this guy with dark black glasses on and his pants hanging off his butt, he didn't even know what the swastika meant. And that whole conversation between the two men was just marvelously written.
I agree. And we have seen incidents over the past however many years, 5, 10, where there was a football player, and now the name is escaping me, and another football player made an anti-Semitic remark. And instead of like calling him out on social media, he said, let's have a discussion. And I know that it's very hard to have discussions with people who think the absolute opposite that you do, but until you can share your story, I don't think we'll be able to change things. I don't know that we are able to change other people's minds, whether it be in democracy, politics or whatever, but I do think having that conversation is so important. Who was I?
Susan.
Yes, Susan Benjamin, then Lynn.
Just a couple of things. The first thing related to what Beverly said, I found the writing delightful and funny, as you did, but I really thought it was strange to have this juxtaposition in tone of this humor with this really serious thing that happened. And especially when we got to the end, when I thought it was going to end differently than it did.
Yeah.
Although I should have referred back to the title. It really, it confused me a little bit, and I found it a little bit upsetting. That's the first thing. The second thing is I just have to tell you of an incident that happened in 2003. Some kids in Deerfield, on the Deerfield High School football team, spray painted a swastika on a fellow student's garage. They were caught. It became a police matter, but I really felt, I was a school administrator at the time, there should be school consequences. And the consequence that I came up with was that the kids and their parents, along with the principal of the school, would sit and watch Schindler's List together and discuss it. I thought that was a good consequence. However, the school didn't necessarily agree with me. And they said, it's really not a school thing. It happened outside of school time. It's a police matter. And the police did, I think they gave them a fine and they had to clean up the garage door. It was really very little and really wasn't an educational consequence, which I really was hoping it would be. I do think the kids were suspended for maybe one football game or something like that. But I think that when young people are doing this and they're doing it, it's like almost a joyful prank. I really think they need to be educated, just like that kid who looked at the tattoo and thought it was something cool.
Mhm.
And the survivor did not really hammer home what it really was, didn't really educate him. And that sort of bothered me in the story too.
Yeah, yeah, I can certainly see that. Lynn and then Alice.
I think the title of the story is the foreshadowing of the end. So I wasn't as depressed. I mean, I was depressed, but I wasn't as shocked. The day the Brooklyn Dodgers finally died, and Gary is from the Bronx, so he's glad the Dodgers. Anyway, I think, and I want us to turn to 202, picking the dot. I think this guy was a brilliant writer. Honestly, there was so many levels of the story, and the way that he used symbols to get his point across was phenomenal. But anyway, they're talking about the name they're going to give the group, and they said, and so they organized like partisans of Hungarian and Polish forests, which isn't as ridiculous as it sounds. These Holocaust survivor saboteurs would have had to operate from less vernal confines, an urban cityscape where camouflage was found only inside concrete, more like the IRA than the Vilna partisans. Max, Sally, Stanley formed their own band of Brooklyn Bandits, an auxiliary police force working without a permit or portfolio. This made sense. After all, these once wretched refugees came to America and settled in a section of New York City that named its Major League Baseball team the Dodgers. Could a more suitable refuge have been found? With Slavic accents and old world past, the survivors would never become true Yankees, nor given what they had endured would they ever grow to be giants. But Dodgers they had been, and Dodgers they would always continue to be, which is talks about their position in society, which permeates the story. They are the outsiders, and they feel that they always will be. By the sheer happenstance of sports mascot, Brooklyn had revealed itself as a borough of impermanence, of mercurial ways and wavering character, of shifty characters, of people on the run, of people who knew when to run and how to dodge. Ironically, the baseball team would earn its nickname by abandoning the borough not long after the Jewish refugees arrived. It would be remembered as the ultimate Brooklyn betrayal. And to me, that was the foreshadowing of what happens to these people at the end of the story. There is a betrayal, ironically a twist, because they feel that the Dodgers betrayed them by leaving. But the story as a question really focuses on loyalties and trust, and trying to find your voice in a society that isn't hearing you. And to me, they had a victory. They said the victory was the fact that they got together and they did something. I mean, all through the Holocaust, they had no control over their environment. Here, they're organizing into this group to try to do something was enough to make them happy. Not ecstatic, but enough to make them happy. So I thought it was great.
I'm going to push back, and I see we have more people, but you say they weren't heard. I think they were heard, but I don't think they understood there was a communication block between them and the Polish policeman. And I'm not saying the Polish policeman, I think he heard them. I don't know if he listened. I don't know. There's some language in there. All right.
I'm talking about generally in society, Vanessa. I agree. I think after they organized, they were heard. I don't know about the police. I think the lack of trust between the police and society and citizens got in the way of communication.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I don't know if anything could have helped that. Okay, Alice and then Sandy.
Yeah, I also love this story. This is kind of responding a little bit to Susan Benjamin, a little bit to Lynn. It didn't bother me, the juxtaposition of the humor and the really serious, sad part of the story. I felt the humor was a way of the author really letting the reader in, to really kind of dig into what the story was. And also part of the humorous thing, I thought it was I could see this story as a movie.
Yeah.
It was just so descriptive. I saw the three of them in my mind. I just saw these three older Holocaust survivors. I thought the author in just a few pages did such a great job of, describing them physically, emotionally, what else? Everything, behaviorally. I mean, everything about them I had in my mind. And the other thing I just want to say is that I'm a real sports fan. So, I knew about the Brooklyn Dodgers and that how heartbreaking it was for people when they left. So I thought it was just such a great, symbolic, and I don't know, Lynn, you're better at than I am. It was just such a great
Image, such a great image.
Exactly.
Yes.
A great way of showing what that meant to these people that the Dodgers left. And I mean, I think people in New York really felt that the Brooklyn Dodgers died when they left. It wasn't the same team. They were going from Brooklyn to Los Angeles. I mean, talking about a difference. So I just thought that the author laid out these ideas in ways that were very relatable to people.
Yeah.
I saw Joyce hit her hand up, then Sandy, then Evie. Joyce, go ahead.
I agree with you, Alice. I love the story. I love the characters. And I love the writing. And I love the humor. And I was absolutely amazed and fascinated with how much these three survivors accomplished, way more than the police ever could.
Exactly.
Because they really transversed the entire borough of Brooklyn. And if that's the right word, I don't know. But, and they got to talk to all kinds of people and had people listen to them. And they learned so much. And not having solved the crime was almost immaterial. Yeah, it would have been a happy ending if they could have found the perpetrators, but I don't think it was that important to the end of the story because their mission was huge, and they were, to coin a phrase, which isn't mine, they were a band of brothers. That was, even though there was Sally was in there, was wonderful. And I loved them. And Alice also, yeah, it'd make a great movie.
Agreed, 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 agreed. Okay, Sandy.
As we've all said, just brilliant writing. And then he brought in the story about the Swiss. I was so glad that he brought that in. I happened to wind up in Switzerland in the 1950s when I was quite young. And even then, I just felt like they were the thieves. They were the thieves. They took from every side. They took from the Jews. They only profited, and yet they said they were neutral. There was no neutrality in Switzerland. They were the thieves. I was so glad that the writer brought that into the story.
Yeah, I mean, that is a huge story. It's still happening now, and people are still claiming. And I think we read another story about it in that the women's that women's book, somebody who kept all of them, they were Yekas in Germany. They were exact. They kept all the records. So they know, they know.
Right.
All right, I'm going to go Evie and then Lynn.
Yeah, I love the story. I love the humor. But I just didn't visualize these characters as what I would see or think of as Yekas. To me, they just seem more Hamish, more fun-loving, more. So I just had a problem visualizing that. It didn't detract from me. But when I think of somebody being very precise, almost snobbish in their demeanor, and that's not how I saw them. I saw them like maybe the Three Musketeers, just kind of having a mission, but having a certain amount of frolic with it as well. But I loved the writing, and I loved what I saw as this dry humor that was interspersed.
What I appreciated, I'm always looking for TV shows that I can watch with my husband, and my middle son lives with us. And, it has to be exciting enough for them, but not too overly violent for me. So we're watching Slow Horses, and it gets very high. It's on Apple TV. It's with Gary Oldham, and they're misfits from MI6, and they solve crimes. And there's an older woman in the group, and they have a computer genius, and he's looking up and he's trying to crack this one thing. And she goes across the street and she calls and says, "I'm looking for my uncle. Here's the license plate. Can you tell me where he lives?" And she cracks it in 5 seconds. So I appreciate. Now, this is 20 years ago, and now technology is all over everywhere. But that they just went to talking to people. That was as important to them. And again, telling your story and sharing your story is the way to go. We will have a Holocaust survivor here in April on a Sunday, and it's always for me very impactful. We'll have the kids here, the older kids, and I think that's the way to teach history. Obviously, I can't teach biblical history that way because I can't bring anybody back through a time machine, although I have been known to dress up as Sarah or Rebecca or one of the mothers. Anyone else?
Yeah.
Merle and then Lynn.
Okay. First of all, I loved Susan Benjamin's idea of seeing a movie, but the movie that I would recommend now is The Fabelmans, which is Steven Spielberg's biopic, because he was a victim of anti-Semitism at his high school in California. And it was so graphic and it was so moving that this person, in spite of being treated that way, somehow grew up to be very successful. The other thing I wanted to say is that I walked away from this story with something I really didn't know before. We all know that swastikas are horrible. And we look at it and say, that is not the right thing. These people should be arrested and punished. But for a Holocaust survivor to see a swastika, I thought this was a great quote. Now, nearly 60 years later, they were trying to reconcile how all that had brought them to Brooklyn had somehow followed them, jolting jolting their memories like a cattle prod and reviving all their fears. A Jew is never safe from his memories.
Mhm.
And, you know, I didn't think about how for Holocaust survivors, seeing a swastika immediately revives those feelings in a different way that the average person couldn't possibly understand.
Mhm.
So I thought that was a great quote.
Lynn.
I'm going to piggyback on what several people have said. If you turn to 206 and then 207, these are juxtaposed. Bringing in, I thought it was over, and then they went back to, they went to Switzerland. So I was sort of a little jolted there, but then I saw the connection, because on 206 at the top, Max, Sally, Stanley didn't mind that their private investigations led to no public arrests. It would have been great to catch the Nazi wannabes, but it was equally rewarding to feel the sensation of their own relevance. Ignored and dismissed by the police, they had taken charge of a crime that had been committed against them and expanded their crime scene investigations. So the fact that they mattered to themselves, they felt empowered. And then comes this suit with the Swiss in the middle, in the second paragraph, but no one asked the Holocaust survivors how they thought the money should be distributed. No one included them in the negotiations. They never got a chance to confront the Swiss face-to-face, depositor to despoiled. Decisions were once again being made on their behalf and without their input. Their opinions didn't much matter. So that is the most depressing part of the story for me. They had achieved such power in their own minds that they could accomplish something. And then this judge, who is a US judge, made this declaration and didn't even ask them. So to me, that is the day the Brooklyn Dodgers finally died, except that I think that the memory of what happened to them haunts them to this day. It's all over the story. They talk about all those scars and wounds, but there are parts of our society that do give them power. You can see that. I mean, of course, the anti-Semites say the Jews ruled the United States and the world. But there's so many incidents where they're made impotent and can't decide their own fate. And that, to me, that was the sad part. If you want, for those who haven't read the story, if you want to get any part of the humor of the story, the description of Sally, listen to this. Her dark hair was hoisted up in a bell tower bun as if she were trying to pick up signals from the NYPD dispatch. With her loose-fitting outfit, she looked like a Jewish genie that had just been released from a bottle of Manischewitz. That was so funny.
Yeah.
And he has to put humor in there, or else we would all just die, you know?
Yeah. Agreed. Susan Wellek.
Okay, so I am one of the people that has not read this story because I read the wrong one.
Well, you're ahead, right? But yeah.
Yeah, right. But I will go back and read it. But in listening to all of you, I have to comment on the fact that I am a volunteer at the Illinois Holocaust Museum. And when you talk about educating people, that is where we need to bring everybody. And I'm given hope when I see the people that are coming through there, and people bringing their children and really educating them and showing them what hate can do. And the thing that the people love the most, I mean, I shouldn't say love it, but they find the most interesting is the hologram exhibit, which I imagine some of you have done. I hope if you haven't.
I've seen it. Can you tell us a little bit about it, Susan?
Sure. Well, the hologram exhibit is really interesting. It's a technological wonder. They interviewed in person Holocaust survivors, and you go into a theater there, And there is, it looks like it's a screen, but it's weird because it looks like there's somebody sitting up on the stage in a chair, and it's a Holocaust survivor, and they tell their story. And then when they are done telling their story, you can ask them questions. It's an amazing wonder of technology, but it's a real education as to what these people lived through and how they survived. And it's incredible. And there's also a virtual reality exhibit where people can put on goggles and walk through as if you're in a concentration camp, and you really live the experience, which of course is horrible. But, and there's this, to me, that's a place to really educate people in this area anyway. And it's amazing how many foreign visitors we get there.
Right. And you get a lot of schools, and a lot of schools from the South Side that they're, you
Yes.
know, the majority of the kids are not Jewish. And it's very important. I don't know if I want to say heartwarming, but it's so important to see.
Right.
Susan, then Susan.
And I will say, yes, the day I was there over the weekend, and there was a whole huge school group of kids from Indiana who had come. Their teacher had brought them. And there were obviously, I mean, you could look at these kids and know there weren't any Jews among them, but it's a great education for them.
All right. Susan Benjamin.
I totally agree with Susan Wellick. I've seen children who are usually not impressed by much, and when you ask those Holocaust survivors questions and they answer you, you know, they have this algorithm and somehow they figured out what to do. It's unbelievable. But the people who come to the museum, sometimes you're right, you have children from the South Side with schools. Sometimes you have children from different educational institutions. The people who should be, I think, seeing it are the haters, the ones who are drawing the swastikas wherever and really have no idea how painful the swastikas might be, what that could do to a human being, just as it did in the story. It just, it makes you feel so insecure. There's no place on earth you can be safe. And I wish that there were a way for the police maybe to identify these people and for them to have to go to that kind of an exhibit, to experience some of that information. Have to feel, the thing about the Holocaust museums is they personalize it. It's not just, 6 million dead. You get to know people, you get to know individuals and their stories. And that's what I think the haters, whether it's in this fictional story or not, that's the kind of thing I think they need.
Agreed. I just, can't agree more. Beverly, then Sandy.
I agree about who should visit the museum, but I also believe Jewish children should visit the museum because a lot of their identity is very shaky, very weak. And I see that even, I live at the V, and we're doing a candle lighting for Hanukkah. And it amazes me how many Jewish adults don't know the blessing. And come the first night, all the Jews at the V show up. I don't know, a lot. It's filled, the little auditorium, and it drops unbelievably by the next night. And I mean, the attendance to light the menorah. And one of the women said to me, "Why are we doing this? Who needs to do this every night?" I said, "We need to do it every night. It's Hanukkah."
That's right.
And we're Jews, and we're living in a world at the V, and it's like the world. We're this minority among the population, and we should be there and we should support it. So it's not just non-Jews and Black kids and who need to to visit the museum or continue to be educated in a way that makes them knowledgeable, proud, want to marry Jewish people or whatever. That's it.
Okay, yeah, listen, obviously I come up against that every day. Sandy, then Lynn.
I thank Susan Wellick for everything she educated us about the Holocaust Museum. My oldest daughter, some years back, when I asked her what she'd like for her birthday, she said, just get her a membership at the Holocaust Museum. And so every 2 years, I renew her membership. And what does she do with it? About 4 to 5 times a year, she makes a date with her friends, all her Gentile friends. She takes them out for lunch and then they go to the museum. So sometimes she takes people, she has friends from Austria. She has friends who are Italian American, Polish. She takes them out for lunch and they go and spend time at the Holocaust Museum. And in that quiet way, without her saying anything, they're getting an education. So it's something you might do for your children.
That's a great idea, and something that we can use. I do have Lynn, right?
I
Go.
just want to say one last thing, which is sort of a downer, but I hope not. There is this in the story, Stanley says, smashing Nazi heads is a good way to take batting practice before spring training. Now we're supposed to be sort of smiling at that, but the fear is that you don't want to become the people you're fighting. I mean, you do not want to develop that kind of anger that you're going to be violent about it. I think the Jews have been extraordinarily patient with the anti-Semitism that's pervasive in our society now. The question is, how much do you fight back and in what ways you fight back? And I think that's critical.
When they go low, we go high, as Michelle Obama is famous for saying.
Right.
And, you know, we have to adhere to that or we'll sink to their level. And anyway, Abby.
Oh, I thought it was through it, but I had a flashback when Sandy was talking because I don't know if you know, but I've been back and forth. We were sold out for many, many years until about 25 years ago, and we left for a long time. But way back then, I think one of our sons, who was a young teenager at the time, gave a Debar Torah on a Friday night service about his experiences. It was right after the museum, the Washington Museum first opened. And I think he was one of the first, young people. I can't remember if we went with him, if it was a school trip, how he got there, but I had totally forgotten. But I remember how meaningful that experience was for him. And I think enough time had passed, being the child of a survivor and could never talk about it because I never knew the questions to ask. Enough time had passed for people to address it, to talk about it. And I think maybe around that time, or maybe a little bit later, when it became mandated in the state of Illinois to teach it. But I think we're ripe now, and there's more of a need now to see it, and technology that is allowed, not just the museum, but even remotely going onto the websites of the U.S. Museum and so forth. And there's a little less oneness or pain than there was previously. So I think education is certainly the way to go.
Yeah. I will tell you, and this isn't in the book, but in Israel, there has been a phenomena, that's what I'm going to call it, where the second and third generations are having their grandparents' numbers tattooed on their arm.
Ooh.
And it's very controversial. Yes, tattoos are forbidden by Jewish law. I don't know of a rabbi who wouldn't bury you because you had a tattoo, and they'd have to know about it. But it is really, it's a phenomena, and it may be happening here as well. Merle, did you have your hand up?
Yes, I did.
Merle and then Lynn.
Okay. When I read this story, I was thinking about how the pen is mightier than the sword. and that the beginning of the story started out that Brooklyn has, the crimes of Brooklyn are all misdemeanors, but not a lesser moral lesson is, learned from what goes on in Brooklyn. And finally, at some point, he says, the borough of Brooklyn is a tribute to bad treatment. So no one is doing anything violent here, but this story is definitely a response to all of this anti-Semitism, that the whole borough of Brooklyn is indicted by this author for allowing this to go on the way it did.
Mhm.
And the way it ended, where the Jews, the Holocaust victims, were not given anything. It really, really hits home that this is not over. It's still going on. And he had to put it in writing, if not actually having, a protest or anything violent going on. He had to not be silent about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Lynn.
I don't want to put down education. I think, of course, I'm an educator, so I think it's important. But I think more important than education is role modeling. And whenever we're in a situation with people who are not Jewish, it really is so important for people to act like mensches. When I was teaching in the Northwest suburbs, I was told that there was a Nazi youth in my class. And I was wondering why this guy kept scowling at me, during the semester. And when I was told that he was a Nazi youth, I somehow wanted to prove to him that Jews are not bad. So I took special efforts to try to be nice to him, to include him in discussions. And I think that is a secret, is that one-on-one example that we set with people who are not Jewish, to show them that, maybe they'll think, well, you're an exception, but at least maybe get them thinking that there's not a generalization to the rule. So I think education's important, but real live experiences, I think, teach more than maybe being in a classroom.
There's something to be said about that, which is why, as an educator, I think everyone should go to Israel. Alice.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you, Lynn, but I think you are educating.
That's right.
It's not.
Well, that's true. In a
It's like,
different way. Yeah.
in a different way. It's
Right.
educating. It's making people aware of things that maybe they're not aware of. Which, yeah, it's, as you said, it's not in a classroom, but I still call that education.
Well, that's true. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Joyce, let me unmute. Yeah. Oh, go
I
ahead.
did. Years ago, through the National Council of Jewish Women, I did a program in the Chicago public schools with another woman called Hello Israel. And the children, I believe it was in 6th grade, studied the Holocaust. And we went into the classrooms and did about an hour presentation introducing the children to Israel through a lot of visual aids and whatever, and talked about the Holocaust. And the kids had never heard of it, and we kept it light. And at the end of the program, we handed out Israeli bubble gum, which they couldn't eat until after school. But it was a fabulous program. We always got lots of questions. The kids sent us thank you notes at the end of the program, and I loved doing it. It was so rewarding.
That's the way to go. That is the way to go. And I also think Evie had to leave. She brought up the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. I firmly believe that museum changed the way we experience museums all over the world. Yad Vashem changed. Everyone became more interactive, used technology, videos, and they were the first. And I remember people would take, like the educators went, and Hadassah. I mean, there were boatloads of people going, and I think there are still a boatloads of people going. But I think that first experience was just so out of the box that it really affected everyone. And you can't, the Holocaust is a very singular subject. When we have the survivors speak here, you can hear a pin drop. Even the 7th graders sit still, and people are like, well, why can't you replicate it? Well, it's the topic, and they're older, and I can't make a 3rd grader sit still. I'd have to duct tape them to the seat. So there's something about that. And eventually, as the survivors die off, we're going to have to go to 1st and 2nd generations. Alice. And you need to unmute.
Yeah, I know I brought this up when we were talking about another story, maybe, but you all know about the swastikas on the gravestones in Waukegan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in a Jewish cemetery, I think I told you I have a friend whose family is buried there, and she said, there were a lot of, obviously, Holocaust survivors or children or whatever of Holocaust survivors. And I don't think that the police have found anybody yet. I mean, she hasn't told me that they have, but the thing about it, I think it's similar to this story, is it was probably, it was probably these young people or thugs or whatever that were completely uneducated. He had no idea.
Because it also said Kanye was right, or Kanye 2024, Kanye was right. And so they're obviously a young segment of the population who knows who Kanye is.
Yeah, I know. So it's just really, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and oh boy.
There is, and I thank you for all of the work that you all do. Susan Wellick, last word. Wait, let me unmute you.
Oh, no, I was waving goodbye.
Oh, you're waving goodbye. Oh, goodbye. I'll redo the stories. Those of you who read the next one, you're ahead. We're going to take January off because I'm off the 3rd Wednesday. And the 1st Wednesday is too close. So I think we'll reconvene in February. I know some of you will still be in Florida, but you can come on Zoom. And then in March and April, we can discuss if we want to come back in person. We would do, where's Beverly? Beverly, we can do multi-access so that we're still on Zoom and in person. Judy, wait, yep. Wait. I'll unmute you. Go ahead.
Okay. What would be the date in February?
So the first date in February is, February 1st. February 1st.
Okay.
February 1st,
Yeah, it's a Wednesday.
and it's the afterlife of skeptics.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Oh,
I
and wait till you
think
read it.
that hybrid, from my understanding, that hybrid does not work well, Zooming and in person.
Yeah.
But you all do whatever you think is best.
Right. We'll have to see.
It can work. It's not great, but it can work.
Susan is correct. Susan Benjamin is correct. All right, everyone. Chag Sameach, Happy New Year. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.